This is Gengar, the most iconic ghost Pokemon on the planet, who also happens to have one of the worst abilities I've ever seen. But today, I'm going to turn him into a serious threat. I'll dive into the history of the oldest ghost type Pokemon, build a team around it, and at the end, he'll dive into Regulation I, one of the hardest formats to ever exist, all with himself as the carry. First, I should probably explain why I care so much about this Pokemon. When I was 8, I used to play football. Or soccer. My dad told me at the start of the season he'd give me $2 for every goal I scored. At the end of the season, I told him I scored 42. I didn't score 42, but without questioning me, he took me down to the local pawn shop and spent $84 on a Game Boy Color and a second-hand copy of Pokemon Blue, the first console I ever owned. I played that game for hours, but the one Pokemon that I wanted, I couldn't get on my own. You see, Gengar isn't available without cable trading, which meant I needed a friend. Luckily enough for me, I had a friend with a Game Boy Color and a copy of Pokemon Yellow. And one day we just sat there with this cable, linking our two handhelds together, and he traded me his Haunter. It evolved mid-trade, and I finally had my Gengar. This was the first time I'd ever got exactly what I wanted out of a video game. So yeah, that's why I care. And as the years went on, I realized something else. Gengar wasn't just one of my favorite Pokemon, it was also one of the best. Over the years, Gengar grew as a staple in the competitive Pokemon community. A fast, especially offensive threat with good coverage. A powerful ability that lets it ignore ground type moves. And with X and Y, Gengar got leveled up with a Mega Evolution. During the era of Mega Pokemon, Gengar was an absolute staple. In an era where Primal Kyogre and Primal Groudon dominated, Gengar was able to stand on its own. But this era was short-lived. With Sun and Moon, GameFreak took the ability Levitate and replaced it with Cursed Body, an almost useless ability for such a frail Pokemon. Now Gengar became exposed to another weakness, meaning it had more threats offering KOs against it. But this wasn't the last of GameFreak's attempt to destroy their iconic ghost. With the end of the Sun and Moon era, Mega Evolutions were removed from all future games in place of different gimmicks. A Pokemon of an entire generation of edgy teens turned to dust by its very owner. Fast forward to Scarlet and Violet, and instead of repairing the gap they created, GameFreak decided to release this abomination of a Pokemon. Golden Go was the final nail in the coffin for Gengar. A Pokemon with more defensive stats, similar offensive stats, and a signature move that deals ridiculous damage. This meant the one thing Gengar had left was finally stripped away. And that's why when I look at the things that happened to Gengar over the years, it bothers me more than it probably should. But caring about a Pokemon and using it competitively are two completely different things. Because the moment I started looking at what Gengar has to work with in the current format, the problems started stacking up fast. Gengar doesn't have many supportive moves, and honestly, it wouldn't feel right using it that way anyway, so it must be a damage dealer. But that immediately created a problem. Most of Gengar's strongest attacks only hit one Pokemon, and in this format, that's just not good enough. We need something that can pressure both opponents at once. Looking through the move pool, I decided Gengar would focus on Dragon and Fairy types, two of the most important typings in the current meta, so I gave it Sludge Wave. There's a reason I chose this move, which we'll get to in a second, but for now, it lets Gengar hit both opposing Pokemon at once. Then Dazzling Gleam to threaten dragons, Protect just to keep it alive, and Nasty Plot for if we ever get the chance to set up. And even with all of that, there was still one big issue. Gengar gets KO'd way too easily, so I gave it Focus Sash. At least now, it gets one turn. With Gengar set, I started building the team around it. First was Zamazenta. Because it's a steel type, it lets us completely ignore our own Sludge Wave. And this is the main reason I brought Sludge Wave to begin with. It also gives us Wide Guard while still applying pressure. Next was Lunala. This slot could have been many different Pokemon, but Lunala gave us something important, a way to deal with Trick Room, and another Wide Guard user to help against big spread threats like Calyrex. From there, I added Incineroar, Ogerpon Cornerstone, and Tornadus. Fake Out, Redirection, and Speed Control. Everything Gengar needs to actually function. But the more I built this team, the more one thing became clear. Everything relies on Gengar. And that makes this team risky, because if Gengar doesn't work, none of it works. So now the question is it actually possible to use Gengar in the current format? And to answer this question, we had to queue into the ranked ladder. Going into the first game, I felt pretty good about the team, and then I saw the lead, Koraidon and Fluttermane, which immediately told me this was going to be rough. I led Gengar and Lunala, hoping to get some early pressure, but right away I had to play defensively. I protected Gengar, terrestrialized Lunala, and it didn't even matter. Lunala just got one shot. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't going to be a clean sweep kind of game. From that point on, I was just trying to stay in it. I tried to slow things down, trade turns, get chip damage where I could. Eventually Gengar did manage to set up a nasty plot and start firing off sludge waves, and for a second it actually looked like I might be able to bring it back. Koraidon went down, then Fluttermane. But the problem was, I'd already lost too much. Ho-Oh came in, and there was just no way to stop it. Gengar dropped, Zamazenta followed, and that was the game. Not just a loss either. It felt like I never really had any control in the first place. So going into the second game, I tried a different approach. Instead of leading Gengar, I opened with Tornadus and Ogerpon to set the pace first. Get Tailwind up, control the speed, and bring Gengar in later. And for a moment, it actually did feel better. I got Tailwind up, started positioning, and when Gengar finally came in, I found an opening to set up a nasty plot. This was exactly what I needed. But the problem with Gengar is, it doesn't take much. One hit brought it straight down to its focus sash. I still managed to get off a Dazzling Gleam and chunk Raging Bolt pretty hard, but it just wasn't enough to swing the game. The next turn, both Gengar and Ogerpon went down to Precipice Blades, and suddenly I was left with almost nothing to work with. At that point, the game was basically over, and now I'm 2 games in, 2 losses, and starting to see a pattern. Gengar isn't just underperforming, it's struggling to even stay on the field. At this point, I needed something to go right, so I went back to leading Gengar, this time next to Incineroar, and right away something did feel different. Weezing didn't activate neutralizing gas, which meant that wasn't Weezing. It was Hisuian Zoroark, and suddenly, instead of reacting, I actually had the advantage. We broke the disguise early, knocked it out, and for once, Gengar wasn't under immediate pressure. That space made a huge difference. I could actually start clicking Sludge Wave, getting consistent damage, and even though Gengar still ended up going down, it had already done its job. From there, the rest of the team could actually play the game. Ogerpon cleaned up the end game, Kyogre dropped, and we finally got our first win. And more importantly, Gengar actually contributed. By the 4th game, I was starting to understand what this team actually needed from Gengar. Not a sweeper, not a carry, just pressure. I led Gengar and Tornadus, tried to set up, and immediately got shut down. Taunt stopped Tailwind, Gengar got chunked down to its focus sash, same problems as before. But this time, I didn't need it to do everything. The rest of the team could take over. Zamazenta came in and started applying real pressure. Tornadus eventually got Tailwind up, and for the first time it felt like I was actually controlling the game instead of reacting to it. Even when Gengar went down early, it didn't really matter, because now the team was in position. Rayquaza dropped, Blastoise dropped, and even through Trick Room, I was able to stabilize. Eventually, it became down to Lunala closing out the game, and somehow it did. After playing this team for a while, it became pretty clear. Gengar just doesn't have the damage to keep up with the rest of the meta. And trying to force it into a carry role in a double restricted meta probably wasn't the best idea, but at the same time, it's not completely useless either. Because when you take it out of that environment, when it's not staring down 2 restricteds every game, Gengar can still work. Just not in the way I wanted it to. And I think that's the part that bothered me the most. Not that Gengar is bad, but that it's not what it used to be. I actually started this video before Pokemon Champions was released, so depending on when you're watching this, Mega Gengar may already be back. Maybe? Hopefully. Hey guys, if you enjoyed the video, please consider subscribing. These take a lot of time to make, and it genuinely helps the channel grow. And if you want to see more like this, there's another video right here. Or here.